Crash and burn.
Hey everybody. So tonight I am looking to discuss Ian McKuen's On Chesil Beach, or Chesil Beach, I don't know how to pronounce it. Look, I really like Ian McKuen stuff. I mean, the first book I read was The Cement Garden. The second book I read was his first one, the collection of short stories, First Love, Last Rites. And this is officially his third book that I just completed. And I thought this book would have been a complete departure. I thought this book was going in a completely different direction than what it went in. I know that Ian McKuen predominantly deals in, death and destruction, and he sort of omitted those things for what happens as the result of you doing nothing. It's not something so dramatic where somebody is dying or there's something like a lot of incest going on. It's just, this book is about what happens when you don't do what you know what you should do, when you don't do whatever it is that you know that you should do. And this book just hit me so hard because as I was reading it, I thought like I kind of understood where the book was going. It tells the story of Florence and Edward. Jesus, sorry about that. Florence and Edward grew up in a kind of a tricky household. His mom was very mentally ill. She was always kind of like out to lunch. She was kind of off doing her own projects. She'd make dinner and that, but she never really understood what was going on around her. So his like family situation was a little messed up. Whereas Florence, she came from money. Her upbringing was more standard. There wasn't anything like what Edward had to deal with like a mentally ill parent or anything, and she wasn't abused or neglected. But Florence is really into music. Edward is really into history, and they don't share an interest in each other's interests. Like when she talks about classical music, it puts Ed to sleep, and when Ed tries to get her on rock and roll, for example, she finds it sort of like meh. Like at one point, she does like Roll Over Beethoven. She thought that song was kind of cool. But overall, she just sees rock as being sort of like for kids. It's not like real music. It's not like Beethoven and Bach and whatnot. So I noticed that there was that kind of friction there. But so anyways, like I said, I thought I knew where this book was going. So they meet, they fall in love, there's the courtship. And chapter 3, or part 3, the book is broken up into 5 parts or 5 chapters, depending on how you want to look at it. And the third part, or third chapter, is dedicated to the night that they have sex. Now, it needs to be said that Florence has hang-ups when it comes to physical intimacy. She doesn't want somebody's tongue in her mouth because it just grosses her out. She doesn't want anybody's penis inside of her because it really grosses her out. And Edward is a little, he's ill-equipped to deal with a person like her. He doesn't have sort of the emotional intelligence yet due to his age. He's too young. He doesn't have the emotional intelligence and the tools at his disposal in order to work with a person like Florence and show her the care and compassion that she needs to sort of get her by this hump. Because all the while, Florence is being completely disgusted by sex. She wants kids. And she knows the only way to have kids is to have sex and then give birth to these kids. Because, of course, they meet back in, I think it's the early 60s when they meet. So, there's only one way to do it. I'm not even sure if in vitro is a thing yet back at this point. I don't think it is. But not being a doctor, I don't really know. And so she's got this massive hang-up with sex, but she does want a family. And the third part, like I said, is dedicated to them having sex. And she just, like, touches Edward's dick and he ejaculates like all over her. Like he's like, oh my god, it's like something out of like a National Lampoon, like Van Wilder type situation where the cum is just like firing out all over her. And she's of course repulsed by this, and she makes a promise to herself to never ever let anything like this happen to her again. And they still follow through and they get married, and then they have the big fight on Chesil Beach, where she suggests that because she's incapable of having sex, she suggests that maybe he has sex with other women. And this causes Edward to just sort of explode on her. And now, personally, I never understood why he exploded on her about this. Now, of course, I've never been married, but I've certainly never been married back in, like, say, the 50s and the 60s. And I know that marriage was probably seen radically different then than how it is now. But I just don't think his anger was warranted. She was saying that because she loved him so much. And that's when the book just destroyed me, because I didn't know what this book was about. I didn't understand what was going to happen next. And as she's walking away from him, heartbroken, on Chesil Beach, he knows that he should go after her, but he's still too filled with anger and pride, and he doesn't. And then the marriage is annulled, non-consummation. The wedding presents are given back. He was working for her father's firm. He retires from the firm, sends in a letter of resignation. And then, see, the thing is, the way the book is set up, like the book, I don't know how many pages it is. It's not the longest book in the world. It's at least a couple hundred pages. And roughly 190 pages are them meeting, the courtship, the marriage, the fight, the breakup. And then the last 10 pages are the rest of Edward's life and how quickly they went by. He gets really into the 60s. He writes rock reviews, sets up things for bands. And then in the end, when it flashed forwards to the end, which would be, I think it's around 2007, 2008, he owns a couple record stores, and he's discussing how online shopping is starting to sort of hurt his in-store business because people are choosing to go to Amazon as opposed to coming into brick and mortar stores, blah, blah, blah. And he's, I think, in his late 70s or early 80s at this point. And he realizes at this point, when he's that old, that all he had for Florence at the time when he was younger was love. But what she needed was love and patience. And this is what happens when you do nothing, when inaction takes over. He knew all along that he should have went chasing after her on that beach, because that's all she needed. He needed her to run up behind him, grab her, spin her around, and tell her that, I'm sorry, I love you. And that would have been it for them. They would have been together forever. But instead, because of pride and arrogance and ignorance and anger, they never see each other again. And he thinks about her all the time, and he wanted to call, but he felt still too proud to call her. And then his life had just come and gone. And the thing is, the fact that the last, like, again, it's not literally the last 10 pages, but that's how I'm going to sum it up. Like, the fact that the rest of his life, from roughly 25 to 75, was summed up in 10 pages is what scared me so completely. And that made this an Ian McKuen book. Yes, this book might have been devoid of incest and child killing and shit like that. And of course, I'm off the top of my head there, I'm referencing 2 stories from his first book, First Love, Last Rites. There's a child killer, and there's a dude who's 15 who ends up having sex with his 10-year-old sister. So yeah, he's taken those disturbing elements out of this book, but he's made a book that's even more disturbing, because inaction is just about the worst thing a person can be guilty of. You know that you should have apologized to that person, or you know that, you should have run after that person and given them the support that they needed and the support that they deserved, but because of your anger, you didn't. And then, boom, your life's over. And you thought about that person a bunch over the course of your life, except it's done now. You guys are old, and you missed your shot. And there's just something so damaging about that. Because I blink now, I'm 45, and I blinked, and my life is over half gone. And I think that's the reason that the end of this book was so impactful, was because, like, I see the reality of it all because I'm not a kid anymore. I don't know. Just, I think the bottom line is, if you ever find yourself in a situation like this, regardless if it's a significant other or it's a friend you have, and you know that you need to do more for them, just do it. Because you don't want to find yourself saying should've, could've, would've when you're in your late 70s or early 80s. You just don't want that. And this book scared the hell out of me. It was so well written. It was so much fun. It was so easy to read. I will argue that Chapter 3 of Part 3 being entirely devoted to them having sex was a little much, but that would be really the only negative thing I'd have to say about this book. Other than that, this book was so heart-wrenching and so heartbreaking and so scary that I just don't want to touch that with like a fucking 1,000-foot pole, because not doing everything you can is something that we're all guilty of at one point or another in our lives. So, yeah. I'm getting out of here. You guys are amazing. So, like always, don't forget, if you like this book or you like this review, don't forget to go and do something nice for somebody. But like always, never forget that the world is actually a better place because you are in it. I'm going to go because I feel really sad and I kind of feel like crying. Have a good night.